What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Albach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. So we're continuing our sort of unofficial series featuring content creators from the magical World Wide Web. And for this episode, I got to chat with DanSheehan. Dan is the creator of the viral and iconic Twitter account, Not a Woof, which you may be familiar with. He's also a comedian, writer, and one of the founders of this really cool storytelling show called We Still Like You. For the podcast, we spent a lot of time talking about the evolution of the Not a Woof Twitter from the past few years, just how it went from like this niche parody account to then blowing up, obviously, and also becoming like a creative outlet for Dan to voice some of his political and social views. We then got into the value of storytelling as a whole and how it relates to the political system, and of course, naturally, we got into online politics, mostly circling around leftism. And of course, we talked about his show, We Still Like You, which is like this live performance and podcast where people will share something that they did that was bad or made them feel ashamed or embarrassed, and then the audience accepts them at the end. I think the whole concept it's really cool. I mean, especially in this heated time of call out and cancel culture where, I mean, there's obviously some black and white areas, but there's also a lot of gray areas, and I think Dan does a really great job getting into how the show navigates this space. Real quick before we jump in here, I know we've been going hard recently with internet culture, guests, and topics because it's obviously one of my favorite things to cover and it's very relevant to what I do. But just so you're all aware, I'm going to start throwing in a wider range of material again soon. I've got some great local musicians and artists and entrepreneurs scheduled throughout April. So yeah. Just so you know, if you've been listening to the show up to this point, I mean, you know we've been always centered around like social media advertising and content creators and the culture, but we also get into some light political and philosophical territory as well, because it's just what I'm into. So I hope you are too. And as always, you can hit me up on my social media accounts with feedback, and make sure you check out Dan's work in the show notes here. There's a link to pre-order his upcoming book, I Am Not a Wolf, which I'm sure will be tremendous. So yeah, I hope you enjoy our conversation. Now let's get into what's really good. Dan, thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure, absolutely. So I know you're a writer and a comedian and a whole bunch of shit. So, I mean, let's just off the top here, because this is our first conversation and I know literally nothing about you except what I see on Twitter. So how did you first get into all these creative fields?
It kind of started when I was way younger. I mean, I've been writing recreationally since I was 8 or 10 years old. I used to just like a lot of kids, I would just write big long stories and try and force my friends to read them to varying levels of success. And then when the internet became a thing, I started putting out weird YouTube videos. I started putting out, weird little bits of writing on Facebook. And then I started doing stand-up right at the end of high school and throughout college. And that was kind of the beginning of looking at it more as a career and like one coordinated effort to like actually, write about, things and to make it my career, as opposed to just in my like childhood and teen years when it was more just sort of things I did to pass time with friends.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I did like stand-up throughout all of college. I still do stand up, but it started back like I started earlier than most. I was 18 when I did my first set.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Did you get eaten alive?
I actually got super lucky. There was this coffee shop near where I grew up, and they did an open mic night on Thursday nights, and it was this coffee shop that was kind of like a central hub for every like 17 or 18-year-old who was like too young for bars but too old for the mall. And so kids would go there, drink too much caffeine, and like all just like it was very much like a goth hangout. It was my kind of spot. And so they did these comedy nights, and they were just packed up with like high school kids, which you don't really see that at comedy shows, like an audience of entirely 16 to 18-year-olds. But that was like very much the case. And so my first show, all my friends came out to watch it, and the jokes were awful. They were a nightmare, but I did really well because everyone was just like excited to see like someone they knew doing it. And then the second show was a nightmare because then none of those same friends were there, and it was just like a 7-person audience, but I like still enjoyed it after that. And so I just kind of kept at it. And then in college, I worked at a comedy club for a couple of years. And then I was in Chicago from 2013 to 2018, just in the stand-up scene there.
Dang, that's awesome. So you've been in this for a while now. Like, were you one of the, like you said, you used to do YouTube videos and whatnot. Were you like a early adapter to that whole platform? Or were you kind of like, when did you get involved with that?
YouTube was always like a weird one for me because I liked posting videos to it. And I think I was pretty early. Like I used to post stuff in like 05, 06.
Oh, so right at the beginning.
Yeah, very, very early on. And I would do like weird sketches and stuff. But the main issue I found, which was like kind of a persistent issue throughout when I was growing up, was just that like finding people to work with was really hard. Like I had like a bad digital camera, but it's, tough to make a movie. Like I always wanted to make like sketches and movies and stuff. I wasn't trying to do the like webcam YouTuber thing because I like a pretty persistent theme in everything that I do is that I don't particularly care about having my own face or voice be attached to it. And so I never really got into the like vlogging thing. But I wanted to make these sketches with friends. And, if you have a sketch with more than 2 characters, you need 3 people. And at that age, everyone's schedules are kind of at the behest of, I can't get my parents' car. I can't do that. So the thing I was a really early adapter to was Twitter, because it was just, you could do it from home. You could do it, and eventually, when I got a smartphone, like a couple of years after that, like it was everywhere. And it was my favorite things about comedy writing, that it was just words. You could just fire it out there and get instant feedback. It felt kind of like doing stand-up, just to a digital audience.
Yeah, it's interesting you kind of brought up just how you don't like your face being necessarily attached to what you do. I feel like, not to say that people who do like their faces attached to things on the internet aren't funny, but there's definitely like a separation there with style of comedy, where you have the more vlogger, your typical stand-up maybe, or someone who just like wants a lot of attention and they use it. Like today you look at I'm thinking like Jake Paul, or like the Paul brothers, or like even like Shane Dawson, like people who like you look at the style of content they do, and it's like, okay, clearly they have something inside of them that just yearns for the spotlight in a way. But like, especially in those early internet days, I mean, like with forums and all like blogs and like the kind of subcultures that were going on at that time, it's interesting thinking back on like how the different styles of humor developed, I guess you'd say, like where YouTube was kind of like a mix mash, because you had people that were anonymous, you had people that their faces were in it. But it's interesting, like, were you in that time, were you more of like a forums guy, or like how did you kind of like get involved with internet culture? Because obviously Twitter also translates to both public and anonymous.
Yeah, I've always had kind of like a weird mishmash of experiences in comparison to a lot of the other folks I know that have been very online for a very long time. Like the main community I was involved with was just the friends I saw in person at school. I didn't really have like a lot of forums and stuff that I was a regular at. And so like my earliest comedy was all trying to make like a very specific group of people I knew laugh. And then it only like any success I've experienced has kind of happened more or less by accident in trying to make, my close friends laugh. Like that's always been the instinct I've tried to chase. Just because I think if you try too hard with trying to impress the whole internet, you either, end up with observations so watered down that they might as well be stolen, or you end up with, just driving yourself insane trying to win the approval of, the internet, which notoriously does not want to give it to you.
Right.
So.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, especially nowadays after there's been waves and waves. Like you said, you were an early adapter to Twitter. I'm thinking, I know Twitter went public, was it 2007 or 2008, something like that?
Yeah, I joined, it was my senior year of high school, so it would have been like late 08 or early 09.
Yeah, because I remember at that time, I think I got mine in 2009, and I remember at the time it was like you would text in like the 40, it was like 40404 or something like you would text on your phone to tweet something. And
it was crazy, yeah.
Yeah, it's so weird thinking back to that, but I remember like it was similar experience for me in the sense where I joined it because a few friends at school and a couple people in my local music scene had joined us. We kind of used it to communicate and whatnot on there, and I wasn't a deep forum user either, but like I know at the time that was kind of the place. Like Twitter was the mainstream public platform where a lot of those early forum users went to then like publish their work essentially and like just use it as an outlet for just throwing shit at the wall. And it's interesting, like thinking back to then to now, how many waves there's been of just different styles of humor and different trends that have come and gone. And it really is the case, like you said, where it's just so odd how like people. Like there's a new crew of joke writers. You probably know a lot of them. I've done some interviews with a few of them. Like on Twitter, the one kid's name is Not Viking or Viking, and then
yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, he's a funny guy, and there's a few others in that group like Michaela Oakland and Kellen and a bunch of these guys. But it's interesting because they're all like 22, like still like in college or just got out of college. And when I've interviewed them, they're like this new wave of joke writers, right? So like they follow a lot of the weird Twitter style accounts. Like they probably follow Not a Wolf, but they haven't been on it for so long to know like the kind of layers of just like what's come and gone over the years. Like it's interesting.
They don't have brainworms yet.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. They're still fresh. Like they're able to come to the table, but it's crazy because like they'll use joke formats and it's like it's almost just part of the natural flow. Like they got on Twitter. People are writing jokes. They see those jokes. Now they can like evolve it from there. Meanwhile, that's been going on for years and years and years where like people have been adapting these styles from previous like generations almost of users. And I think it is interesting, like over the time you get those people who try to just like imitate and then fail most of the time because they're just, like you said, stealing or just trying to be something that they're not. But then you get this like new fresh batch of people that come along. It's not like they're doing anything, I don't know, like revolutionary. Like they're just doing the next phase of whatever these jokes are, and that's becoming successful. So it's crazy just to watch the styles evolve. You know what I mean?
Yeah. It's definitely changed so much just even in the last couple of years, and especially since the early days when I was first on there. Because at that point, like in college, Twitter was like a hybrid joke machine / journal for me, and because the user base wasn't really large enough back then for me to have even considered having like a big account on Twitter an option.
Right.
I followed like a handful of celebrities and stuff back then, but it was a smaller world back in those days, and like now it. Back in those days, it was 9 years ago, but like,
but in internet years,
yeah, on the internet, like having been on Twitter for a decade makes me feel like some sort of grizzled war veteran telling people about things. Like it doesn't make any sense, but it has changed so radically. Because, you had like the initial weird Twitter burst, which was like the first time anybody thought about using it as a platform for comedy. And that was like primarily all anonymous, all like, they were kind of proud of their anonymity in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, I remember, too, just thinking back to 2009, 10, 11, probably maybe even up till 12, just when a tweet, quote unquote, went viral, it had such a different connotation to it. Like, if your tweet got like a dozen retweets or like a few dozen retweets, it was the coolest thing ever. Like you said, it's just such a smaller world, and it was still so, like, the internet wasn't as centralized. So, like, when something went big on a platform, it easily spread to other platforms because there just wasn't as much, like, inundation with data everywhere. So, like, even if a tweet just got, like, 100 retweets somewhere, that easily could have been spread to other platforms because all, like, the right people saw it on that platform and then moved it somewhere else, which is really weird. But I don't want to ramble too much about all this without getting into what you do and your whole character of not a wolf, because
Totally.
it's got it's got one of the most unique and consistent voices that I've seen on all of social media. It's a very, very cool and unique character. So I mean, like, first off, what made you start the account?
It was another one of those things where I was kind of just trying to make my friends and like the people around me laugh. It started, I was a senior in college. This would have been like 2012, 2013. And I was like studying for finals or something, just goofing off and not like getting what I needed to get done. So I went on OkCupid and made a profile for a wolf. And I just thought it would be a fun goof to just have it obviously be like a wolf pretending to be a man. And it was boosted by this fact that I had found like a really funny picture for it on Google Images. And so like, you know, I just posted it, took some screenshots, sent them to my friends, and then like put pictures of the screenshots on Facebook. And then suddenly like it got more likes than most Facebook posts of mine had gotten. But then within an hour or two, the profile had been taken down. Like OkCupid was not having it, as they shouldn't. Because I've done a fair amount of like dating app shenanigans, especially like earlier in my writing career when I didn't understand how bleak those apps could get. And I now feel retroactively kind of bad because it's like, you know, people putting themselves out there. I'm sure it doesn't hearten you to see a picture of a wolf in a suit, just to be like, oh, cool.
Dude, if
like,
people get offended or hurt by that, I mean, come on. You see a wolf, come on.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't think it ever offended anybody, but yes. So once it got taken down from OkCupid, my friend was just like, oh, well, you should like do more with that. That was really funny. And I like didn't really think about it until a year or two later, when I made a Twitter account for it, and I just started like posting goofs, and it had like probably like 100, 200 followers. And then through just purely like following everybody that I thought was funny, got some like weird Twitter adjacent people into it. And then just through like a couple, and like this is kind of how it was like back in 2013 and 2014 on Twitter, where it was just like through a few people retweeting it, it like ballooned up to this following of like 2,000 or 3,000.
Wow. Yeah, that's all it took.
Yeah. And like at the time that felt like huge because my own account, I think, was just barely above it at that point. I think I had like pulled together like 8,000 or 9,000 followers. And yeah, I will never know like what broke it, like what made it explode. But there was some point where I went from having like 3,000 or 4,000 people following the Wolf account to having, I think like the first one brought it up to like 40 or 50,000, and then it went up to 80,000, and then it hit 100 like within that year. Now it's at 160, and it sits like much more at the level now than it ever has before, which I think is mostly probably just because it's found its size audience, because it's like a very particular brand of humor. I never expected it to be like this has 3 million followers type thing, because it's it has a very specific demo. But so I guess it started as just this goof that exploded, and I never really knew who to thank or like what caused it, but it's obviously been great. It's, as someone who's wanted to write funny stuff my whole life, it was the first opportunity to like actually do so.
So you really have you can't even point to a specific tweet where it just like blew up to, like you said, like a few thousand to in the tens of thousands, like, or was this just like a gradual climb, or was there any? Go ahead.
There were two like huge points where it was like tens of thousands overnight.
What?
Yeah, and one of them I think is because I did that thing where you can tweet for Tig Notaro for a day, and that like got it a little bit, but it was not. That was just like a couple of thousand or something, and I was like thrilled when that happened. I was like, whoa, this is people like it. And then I think it was someone must have written like a roundup or something about it. Maybe they like put all the tweets in an article, because it was overnight. It was like tens of thousands of people followed it, and like I had to go through my phone and change all the settings because people were going through and like retroactively liking every post. And this was like earlier in its life, so like that wasn't that many tweets. Like there were probably only a couple hundred, because back then I'd fire off 1 or 2 a week with it, because like you don't want to bother the friends that you're trying to like joke with. And then it didn't become like a multiple posts per day thing until recent years when like the whole kind of tone of the thing changed. But like at the start, I was not prepared for that level of explosion. And it hit like 100,000 I think at the end of 2017.
That's so wild, man. So like I'm trying to think, how would you, so where the voice is at now, I mean, it's very consistent, it's all caps, it has a very distinct humor, and you kind of hit on a lot of the same topics. Like, how would you say that voice has evolved from the time you started to now?
I used to have like really strict rules for it. When I was like just starting it, I was like, okay, like this is a very specific voice, like a very specific character. It's like all caps. There's no use of contractions. No use of punctuation, which was all like very fun at the start. But then also like there's only so many jokes you can tell about the inherent goofiness of, like a wolf trying to open a door, or like a wolf trying to hold a cup. Like those are all funny images, but at a certain point people kind of were like, yeah, we get it. So it sort of evolved as time moved on. And then a lot of what did it was just as I moved from being like a sunny post-grad into realizing like the reality of the career that I'd chosen, I was in a lot of like shitty office jobs that were like crushing me spiritually and like mentally, where I was just, having to force myself to do things that I had not been trained to do in college, because as it turns out, an English degree from a state school isn't worth the nothing that it used to be worth. And so it was like a lot of my own angst bubbling up. And then the election hit, and I think 2016 kind of marked this massive explosion of like societal angst. And so suddenly everyone was like very upset. Everyone was very angry, and I had been upset and angry for a long time. And so I had accidentally gifted myself a platform on which to scream in all caps without punishment.
That's great. I was gonna ask you at some point. I was thinking about that. Just like I like how the account inserts that sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle political and like social perspectives through the voice of the wolf, because it's like you're critiquing capitalism and you're saying stuff like billionaires are bad. And it's interesting because, I mean, I'm probably, I don't remember when I followed it exactly. I've known about the account for years, but I don't know like the history per se exactly of how the voice has evolved in all these different ways. So, like, from your perspective, like you said, the election is really kind of what ramped up some of that angst. But like so as you've been writing these tweets, obviously you personally feel the way that you're projecting through the wolf, but is it also kind of weaved into the character itself, or is it more just like you said, kind of like an outlet for you to vent through?
Yeah, I think at a certain point, like the very early tweets were all kind of almost body horror jokes about, the physical idea of a woodland creature trying to survive. It was all about like, I can wear gloves, it's no big deal, and like stuff like that.
Right.
And then a few years passed, and I think just because of like where I was at as a person at that time, like it started to turn more inward, and the line between what was the character and what was just this like very like base screamy version of my own anxieties kind of started to blur. And I think that's where it kind of got into maybe more relatable territory for people. Because I think like at the start, it was just very much kind of like a weird Twitter gimmick account. Mm-hmm. And then I think, it just sort of naturally evolved into this whole other thing. And I think maybe that's where people found like a point of relation to it, because it's ended up, I think for a lot of people I've talked to that liked it, it's a very, it's a very easy concept to project oneself onto, where we all feel like we're kind of gently creeping through our day, not trying to let anybody know that we're this grizzled, horrid thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to someone about this recently, just how a lot of those early stage weird Twitter style accounts, and not even just the weird Twitter ones, but the ones that kind of came after weird Twitter, which I don't even know what, and I know they hate being called weird Twitter, but it's just an easy label. And like, you know how it is, but like, I'm trying to
They're
think.
a very insular group. It's tough because they reject the label, but also it's like at a certain point you have to be able to
I totally get that it's like an amorphous blob because they all kind of came from the forums, but obviously the majority of especially the main accounts all are friends with each other and interact with each other, so it makes you a group. But either way, like there's another one, I don't think you would classify it as weird Twitter, but it kind of came a few years after that, maybe between like 2012 and 2015, which was like joke Twitter almost. Like it was still anonymous, but it was like a lot of people who just strictly use the like the joke format style tweets. And I was talking to someone, like a lot of those accounts, and I was talking to someone recently about just how and this is obviously not, I'm making a generalization, not to speak for all of the weird Twitter or all of the joke Twitter accounts, but it seems like a lot of those accounts in the past couple years since the election have kind of fallen by the wayside a bit. And obviously there's people that have moved on and they're not as active anymore. But as far as the ones that are still active, it's interesting because I feel like to the point of what you just said, like recently you've gotten more relatable and you're kind of inserting a part of your personality through the account. And I feel like that element of Twitter personas has become so much more important in recent years because like people are getting humor and they're getting these jokes pretty much all over the place now. So like it's not, in most cases, unless you're like drill, and like it's in most cases it's not enough just to be funny. Like you have to have some kind of personality or some kind of niche thing that you do that gets people wanting to come back. So I think it's really interesting how you said like the account really started to kind of blow up and get more, I don't know what you want to call it, like not a cult following necessarily, but just like more people that are consistently coming back to what you have to say personally, because it's not just about the character anymore. It's now about this weird integration of the character, and then you're able to project part of who you are through that character, and it's not like you said, this person with whether this is like some dude sitting in a chair angrily or whatever typing opinions into Twitter. Like now it's seen through this cool lens where it's like you're getting humor and you're getting parody at a character on top of all of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've always, when I try to explain it, I like that it's a harder thing to define these days than it used to be, and like I've been very lucky to not encounter too many people who dislike it, or at least if there are people who widely dislike it, they have done a very good job of it never coming across my dashboard. Yeah, that's been nice. Like there are a handful of people who have like quote tweeted some political thing and been like, oh, I hate when the parody accounts like read one Wikipedia article and start to. And it's just like, dude, I've been following leftist politics since like before the election. Like I got really into it in college because I was a very pretentious college kid. And it came from like a very, well-meaning place. And I got very much, way less annoying about it over the years. But like my political beliefs have been pretty ironclad for my entire adult life. And so the fact that they started manifesting through this account was mostly because I think, like a lot of people who are trying to write comedy, we hit this insane cultural point where I just looked at it and I was just like, what the fuck am I doing? Like, it feels like aiding a distraction and at certain times where it's like I'm trying to tell jokes about how it'd be funny if a dog wore pants right. when we're running out of, arable topsoil. Like there's a certain point where it feels like to ignore all that is a political act in itself.
Yeah, and you kind of need both, right? I mean,
there's still absolutely room to talk about a dog wearing pants because that image doesn't get any less funny. But it's to become apolitical, I think right now is political, no matter how much people don't want it to be. And so to be someone who I think is like just writing straight up jokes for all, like I don't begrudge anyone who wants to do that, but for me, I've never been able to like, I like that at a certain point, certain people became alienated from the account because it was no longer condoning. Like if I did a fundraiser for, like Trans Lifeline and a bunch of people were like, oh, we don't approve of that. I'm like, there's the fucking door, dude. Like, yeah. Like I like having, something I stand for, even if it occasionally people are like, well, look at your Twitter account. What does that mean? It's like, no, I'm a writer, and I, wanted to write stories and things like that, but I got Twitter. I didn't get a big, you work with the platforms you're given in your career. And some people are very lucky and are given the ability to work in the exact platform they always imagined. And the rest of us write on Twitter. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're all doing what we can with what we have. I mean, you think most people, it's just such a, I don't know, it's such a weird situation. I kind of come at it from the perspective of relatively, this is in quotes, everything belongs. Like, obviously, there are fringe ideologies that do not belong and that we shouldn't endorse and all that. But, like, to your point of saying, like, people that say they aren't political or try to be fence sitters, like, that is in itself a stance. And obviously, like, there's people have different roles. Like, there's some people who, I don't know, like, we know them in real life, like, where I know I have friends that if they were to start spouting about politics online, I'd be like, dude, please stop. Like, I know you, and I know you don't know what you're talking about. Like, you're doing this for all the wrong reasons. You know what I mean? Like, I think there's a lot of that. So you kind of have to, like, I don't know, because some people, like you said, you're kind of solidified in your identity and your beliefs, and you have like a foundation to work with for what you're trying to implement through the account. And that makes total sense. And I think there's people whose entire job it is to talk politics and to get into that. And then there's people who, maybe it's part of their personality or whatever, but they're not as confrontational or they don't want to be as divisive. And, if that's, like you said, if that's who they are or whatever, that's fine. But you're right. Like, I think, especially in this climate, like, we're all, like, I forget who said this recently. I was listening to some podcast, but it's like how we choose to delegate our time is politics. Like, what we choose to invest, our time online doing, or like what we listen to, what we read, like all the information that we choose to absorb, that is all politics. Like, we're prioritizing information, we're prioritizing, who we are, what we think is important. And you're right. I think there's a lot of tendencies, not just on Twitter, but I mean online in general. Like, we go online for escapism, and now that politics have been injected into pretty much every corner of the internet, that escapism is kind of like, it's still there. You can still find it, but it's now integrated with politics in a way where people can't really, like, people that were used to getting online just to be like, oh, I want to read some funny tweets, or I'm going to watch some funny YouTube videos, or go on this subreddit or whatever. Now it's like you go to those communities or those places and politics are everywhere. And I would argue that that's a good thing, but we're kind of in this like weird in-between time where it's like, for people like you or I, we've been online forever, so we adjust a little quicker than the average person. But I think for most people, it's still there's a lot of like growing pain. You know what I mean? Like, people are just really having a hard time balancing it and coming to terms with the fact that everything is political, because up until very recently, we were able to kind of just get away with the idea that, politics are politics. Who wants to talk about politics? Like, that's some boring, like, that's divisive. I don't want to get into all that. Like, leave that at the door. And now we're all like, no, that is like the thing that we need to talk about most,
I think that's where a lot of the backlash against the idea of like anyone saying anything about politics in the world of comedy, I think that backlash comes from a lot of people who are, like, at their core in denial about living through like a tumultuous time in history, or more so like the idea that there are no non-tumultuous times in history, that like society is a very tenuous thing, and it needs people to be plugged in and involved. And like this recent several decades of people having the privilege to be able to unplug from politics and not really think about it. No, I don't really like, I see points on both sides, like that whole thing. Like, that is it's a pretty recent invention. It was, And so I think like in certain ways, I think escapism is a great thing to, take when you can get it, but also there's absolutely such a thing as overindulging. And I don't really feel a need to put more of it out there. Like, for me, the media that I've always adhered to and like always been drawn to is the stuff that doesn't dodge around the harder, harsher
Right.
parts of life. Like, I'm a lifelong Mountain Goats fan, and half the reason I love, John Darnielle's songs is because when you listen to it, he, yells in your face about what's wrong with the world that we're living in. Yeah, it's like at a certain point you can feel gaslit by reality when it says like, no, actually everything's pretty chill and fine, just to have the first person look at you and say, no, you're right, it's not. And I wanted to, make things that for people who felt similarly, like it's good to, I think, embrace the more chaotic parts of the world that we live in, and to, be afraid of them sometimes, or to at least admit that we're afraid of them.
Right. And this is an interesting tangent to go on, so I'll let you kind of elaborate on this if as much as you want to, and if not, we can just kind of drift on to the next thing. But like from your perspective, then, granted all that we just went over, there's also something to be said about just the topic that literally every podcast or every person covers at one point, which is the whole idea that we're living through this very bizarre technological revolution where, people are staring at screens all the time, and we're like, those lines between our personhood and our online reality are completely blurred. And now it's like obviously you can make it's hard to, at this point, I think you can't draw set conclusions because it's all like correlation and causation. Who really knows, like, if this is all causing depression or causing anxiety or causing, you name your problem. But at the same time, like, it's undeniable that like we're living through a time that, like, coupled with the very serious political and economic global realities that we're talking about here, we also have this weird technological revolution going on that's definitely acting as a distraction and acting as this this sort of like extra appendage now that we have, where we can all just go on the internet, go on our social media, we can be who we want to be, we can say what we want to say, and we can then just come back to reality. And there's definitely something to be said about how like that's affecting our mental health, like in this adjustment period. So like, do you have any general thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we are dealing with like a public mental health crisis on a lot of levels. I chalk a lot of it up to capitalism. I'm a very staunch anti-capitalist. I think that, like, when we attach our entire chance at this nebulous idea of happiness to our utility towards capitalism, and like our utility then is based off of our wealth, our youth, and all these circumstances that for the most part are like out of your control and decided before you're born. Like, is it any shock that people are pretty stressed out about that it's interesting. I've actually for the Not a Wolf book, I've been working through a part kind of like similar to this, discussing this, that like, it's almost become chaotic in the same way that nature's chaotic, where it's like the hierarchy is very clear and visible, and we have just enough self-awareness to see it and say it's fucked up, but not enough to change anything.
Right.
I think that definitely leads to a lot of it. And I think what the internet's done is it's put all of us in the same room. Is suddenly all these thoughts that used to just fester in the back of our heads and manifest themselves in different ways. Maybe, one person's like, well, that's like a weird anxiety to have, but I'll just work harder. That's what they all want you to be, that guy. But then the rest of us are also, it's like, oh, well, maybe I'll eat too much. I'll drink too much. I'll sleep too much. I'll be really sad. Or, like there's always, like, these anxieties have to manifest themselves somehow. And I think now that we're all able to communicate more easily about them, I think that it's providing a kinship in certain ways, and then it's providing kind of this mass communal anger in another, because when you get a group of people into one room, even if they're all mad about the same thing, that's, equally likely to become a protest or a riot.
Yeah, it's interesting, like, just how you noted it has to manifest itself in all these different ways, because it is such like a, like, I can remember, I forget what the movement was called, but you might remember in like the early 90s, there was this is obviously the time like internet's about to blow up, the toy manufacturing is blowing up, and consumerism is kind of reaching an all-time high, at least in the US at that point. And there was something, I want to say it was like self-love or self-affirmation. There was like one of these like kind of Oprah style movements going on in the early 90s, where like it was a big trend where parents were like reaffirming their kids and like really just like making their kids the center of attention and being like, you're a princess, like you're a little prince, like you're everything, like this whole idea of like idolizing children. And then like those children, like I was one of them, we like grew up, then we were being fed, you know, Happy Meals, and we're getting all these like really cheap plastic toys that are like new versions of them are coming out every other month. And like we kind of grew up like being the center of attention, and then growing up with the internet where we could project our ego or our like need to be happy or be affirmed out there for everybody. And now it's just like, it's just strange because now like we're all adults, or we're all becoming adults, and it's like you can kind of look back and see the breadcrumb trail and be like, oh yeah, like that's why maybe I'm like dealing with all this. Like this is an ongoing pattern that's been going on for decades and decades and decades, and we're like not the final, but like we're at like one of the later stages of what's going on with like these patterns, because now we're seeing a lot of the traditional institutions break down and like traditional understandings of, you know, consumerism, and like all these companies are consolidating, and we're being fed our nostalgia back to us, and it's like all this is happening so quick, you know, like we're eating it up because, like you said, we're all anxious or depressed or financially unstable or we're unhealthy or whatever it might be, and our way of like processing that then is these escapes. It's like, oh, cool, Nintendo is like remaking some N64 game for like the third time on like a third generation of a device. Like, I'm gonna buy that new device and then play the same game that we played when we were like 6 years old or whatever, and we just keep doing this because we're just looking for that way out. And it really is, I don't know, like I think about it a lot, and obviously you do too, and it's just it's very daunting, and no one wants to talk about it. Like, I brought this up to a friend the other night, and I was just kind of like, you know, messing with her because she had we were talking about like just having our childhoods resold back to us, and she's just like, yeah, I love it. And I was just like, like it's such like a weird, I don't know, like it's very difficult to communicate this to the masses.
Yeah, like I'm sure it's great if you can embrace it. I think part of it is because of the career I've chosen. Like, you know,
just permanently cynical.
Yeah, I know guys who I went to high school with, and, you know, I grew up outside Chicago, and, you know, they got the big finance job, they've got the sweet apartment now, and, you know, they're not racists or homophobes or transphobes, but, you know, oh, geez, they sure do think the left is coming in a little hot. Like,
right,
you know,
they're so comfortable.
Exactly. And so I think for people like that, yeah, this is an easy sell. But I think like for everyone else, it's kind of a perfect system, isn't it? It's like, you know, up until a certain point, you had 1 million kids so that, you know, you'd have help on a farm. Like, kids were more of a hindrance than a help. And now it's just like that children are safe. It's the idea that we just like kind of, it's almost like they spend 18 years just feeding you bliss so that then they can package it and sell it to you when you're older and you realize the world's not that great.
That was a way more succinct and soundbite way of saying what I was saying. That's great.
It's absurd. It's crazy, but it works too, is the thing. It's like, you know, when I hear like, oh, they're making a new version of Ocarina of Time or whatever, like, I'm like, oh, fuck yeah, I'm gonna buy that. Like, you know, it's like, because who doesn't want to like transport themselves back for like a day? Like,
it feels good.
If it works, it works. It's just like, I would also love to have health insurance somewhere in that process.
Yeah, I mean, what a mess. I mean, I don't want to. You had mentioned, I think you'd mentioned, at least, unless I misheard you, but you mentioned the book that you're working on a little earlier. So I want to kind of get into that. We can kind of rope in what we're talking about here, because I was going to ask you. First, I'd love for you to get into the concept of the book and what it's all about. But then I was also going to ask just like how much all this that we're talking about and how these sort of political, whatever you want to call it, socioeconomic views that you have are kind of coming through the Not a Wolf Twitter account. Like, I was going to ask if that is also the case with this book that you're working on for the account.
Totally, yeah. If you have been enjoying thematically where the account's been at over the last couple of years, I think the book will be a very pleasant surprise, because I'm not dodging around the politics at all. Like, I feel bad because every now and then I'll get a tweet from someone who's like very good natured. It won't like be a Republican troll or someone who's just like, oh, I miss like just the classic old like jokes about wolves or whatever. And I'm, in my head, I'm kind of like, me too. I also wish that I could go back to before my brain was like constantly on fire about this stuff. But like, the state of things absolutely affects the stuff that I want to write about. And so the format of the book is, it's still a comedy book. It's not a manifesto. It's not a.
This is some like this. If you were someone who doesn't like anything that you're saying and they're listening to us talk right now, it literally does sound like we're setting up like a propaganda like manifesto.
Yeah. I sound like I'm gonna at the end start trying to plan a group meeting and get everybody out there protesting, which hey, I would love. But,
bring your wolf mask.
It is still comedy. Like I'm very proud of like the laughs per minute that I feel like this story has. I don't think I've compromised in the laughs department, but it is absolutely for people who the target audience is people who feel like they're working a shitty job that they don't know their future with, and their boss makes inexplicably high amounts of money, and they just like. It's for anyone who's like looking at things right now and is concerned, but completely powerless to change, the situation that they're in. And I think like I try not to hit people over the head with it, because ultimately like the story picks up, and you're a wolf that's been a part of human society for some time, and you're just going to work. It's a Friday. You're going to work. You're just going about your business. But today is a more special day than most, because you've been promoted from intern to regular employee, which means you get to people will recognize that you exist for the first time, essentially. And so it's you interacting with coworkers. There's like a very like business bro rival type that you have, and then you have a boss. You have your own intern. Like, how are you going to treat them? So it's this choose your own adventure where basically you try to make it through one day without blowing your cover. It's, you can go on a date. You can go to a chain chicken wing restaurant. You can there's a bunch of weird avenues you can take it down, or you can say fuck it, and there's like a whole thing you can do where you just go back to the woods and do that.
That's just like the get out of you're just like you give up basically. That's the end of the
story. And that branch is like very deliberately made for people that kind of just prefer the jokes about nature and animals and comparisons between wolves and people, and it's less political in that way. And so it's not, I wouldn't call it a political book. It's still very much comedy over everything, but it definitely, it has beliefs. It has a place on the political map that you could place it.
Right. The way you're describing it makes it sound like it could either become a Disney movie or like a Black Mirror episode. There's a lot of room for interpretation.
Some sickly hybrid of the two, probably. But yeah, I think like I have had the plan for a very long time. Like the pitch was always as a choose your own adventure, because I love the format. I have like always wanted to write within that world, and I think for this character, mundane choice is like a huge part of how this character would get through their day-to-day life. And so also ultimately, like, it's a book based off a Twitter account. Like, no one wants to read a 300-page self-serious novel about it. Like, it is designed to make people laugh. It is designed to be fun and digestible, but also to not be like completely escapist in that way. Like, it's very tied to the things that we all are experiencing every day. Well, but not in a way that's going to beat anybody over the head with the more depressing parts of it. It's more so, playing the absurdity of our current landscape for comedy.
Right. Well, it kind of ties back to this whole idea that you've been saying, or we're saying toward the beginning, where you're just kind of talking about, for you personally, the style of humor that you got into, where you like this kind of anonymous character building, and how Not a Wolf is a character that you've built, and through that character, you're able to say certain things and tell certain stories and have certain just like viewpoints that you can express through it that people can then digest a lot easier than just if you're like shouting facts at them or like shouting opinions at them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think there's. Oh, go ahead.
What I hope is that people find things to relate to in it. Like it's, it is very much like the wolf is placed in the, essentially the same place as any like mid-20s to late 20s, adult right now. Like it's, it's just that the wolf is a little more stoked to be there because, you get to sleep inside. And so it's a lot of that. But yeah, writing it has been a lot of fun, and I'm hoping because like when I had originally started the whole account, I always joked to my friend that especially when it was a small thing, I didn't have any sort of plan to do it forever. So I would always very like ominously tell him, I'd be like kind of like as a joke on J.K. Rowling, I'd be like, I know what the last words of Wolf Twitter are. But I did have like a vague plot line in mind, especially when it kind of became this weird culty thing where for a while I would say it was somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 people that were just like every single tweet they were fucking on it.
They had
and
the
it was like
notifications turned on.
Yeah, it was a very insular community, and so it did kind of feel like telling this story to a group. And so I did have like kind of an ending in mind if I ever hit a point where I felt like it wasn't funny anymore. And then when the account got bigger and it changed, like it got far away from the point where I could tell any sort of story with it because it was too welded to like my own like personality and my own personal opinions. It kind of got away from the character and into just being more of like a vehicle for like quick comedy. But I've taken a lot of that story and turned it into this book, and then also just used it. I've wanted to write books my whole life, so this is, I'm getting to do a lot of things that I've had kind of ready for a long time.
Yeah, it's the perfect vehicle. Is the book? Is it in all caps?
It is not in all caps.
Good.
So the book is it's very traditional in the way that it's written. The only all caps part is the dialogue of the wolf, but it's actually like more sparing because the majority of the story is told like it's internal. So there's very little all caps to deal with. I promise I will not make anyone read a wall of all caps.
That's awesome. I kind of want to tie this back in a way back to politics just for a moment here, because I feel like storytelling at this stage is so, or just this era, whatever you want to call it, like this time that we're living in, is so important, and it always has been. I mean, obviously people relate to stories more than anything else, and I think going back to like the political spectrum, this is something a grievance, I guess you could say, I've had over the past few years. I mean, I've always been into it, but I didn't seriously start digging in until probably 2013 or so. And from around that point to now, like one of my biggest, I guess you could just say grievances, I guess, with specifically the Democratic Party is just how bad they've been in the past few years at telling a good story. Because I feel like politically, right? Like we, again, just like everything else, just like your account, just like reality, like we relate through storytelling, like we relate through metaphor, we relate through our experiences. Like it's not like if we were to be speaking to someone from the opposite, like the complete polar opposite political perspective as us right now, it wouldn't matter if you or I were showing facts and graphs and information to like discredit their viewpoints. Like it would never work. Like they're just going to be like that's not valid. Like we'll find our own data or whatever. So like,
yeah,
you know what I mean? So like when it comes to just like the spectrum the past few years, man, if Republicans are good at anything, or just conservatives in general, they're really good at telling narratives. They can lasso the entire group together over like united causes really, really well by being like making these really binary, usually through like binary statements, like just like really sensationalism, and they use fear and they use very like visceral human emotion. Whereas like the Democrats, I've noticed, because like Democrats and just left-leaning people, like from, so you could say, I guess, like Democrats and leftists as a whole, we're kind of like more in this deconstructing realm because like it's naturally, the party is naturally progressive. The party is trying to critique and upheave the way things are, whereas conservatives are trying to conserve it. So like it's natural, I think, for the political rhetoric to be more like, this is what's wrong, rather than pointing to this is what we need to build, or like this is like what we need to look toward. And I feel like it's changed in this past election cycle, like since the midterms, maybe, since now a lot more of the mainstream politicians are focusing on healthcare, and they're focusing on these areas that like people really care about, and they're starting to build a narrative. But just in the past like several years, I feel like that is one of the key elements that a lot of pundits talk about with Democrats, just kind of losing the plot in a way, because it's like it's very easy to get lost in all these different areas that society obviously needs to improve. Like we can't fix them all overnight. And when the party, I guess, as it becomes the face of the party, is just criticizing and just like tearing everything down, then that like doesn't drum up inspiration or motivation for people to vote or to get excited about politics, because then everything just sucks. Like all we're doing is focusing on how bad everything is, and like that's not a very encouraging platform, I guess, to run off of. So I'd be interested to hear, one, your thoughts on that, and then just two, how important you think storytelling is today when it comes to our politics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big problem that Democrats have run into, is like, for better or for worse, like the Democrats seem to see the world as it could be, as some sort of weird Aaron Sorkin-esque West Wing world, and the Republicans see it as it is, where a somewhat good-looking dude who just yells at you can win. That's every Republican, with the exception of Trump, who's just a bad-looking dude who yelled at them and still won.
I was waiting for that. Like,
yeah, he looks gross and he still won. Usually their model was like, take a former football star, give him some words about, some platitudes, and he'll win. And like, that's kind of politics as a whole, is like we tend to focus on the person far more than the idea, which is, I think, part of what frustrates me a lot with the Democratic Party, is like, just these last couple of days, we've seen the rise of the Beto O'Rourke discourse, and he's standing on tables and he's talking about coming together and
just saying nothing.
Yeah, just real low key, being like, by the way, also like single payer, not what you think it is, and I'm not going to tell you what I have in mind. Anyway, this table though, let me get on top of the table. It's like,
just let me wave my arms around a little bit.
Yeah, and it's, for me, I think like we do need to get better at speaking to an audience in a way that isn't just like sticking our thumb out and going, pretty bad, huh? Like, because that's talking about how the other guy's bad is never gonna, people will just agree and be like, yep, this is the state of things. It's like, or worse, you get people to be like, yeah, God, and your guy sucks too, so I guess everybody's bad. Like, I guess I'm just gonna like, get a sandwich instead of thinking about this.
Yeah,
like,
just be a nihilist.
Yeah, I have, my own problems with like a lot of the stuff the Obama campaign did behind the scenes. Like a lot of the issues we're dealing with now, like these, ICE detention centers and drone bombings and stuff, like they started under a Democratic administration. Mm-hmm. But like what that campaign did do better than any other campaign was get people fired up about the idea of a better world.
Right.
And like most of campaigning is lying anyway. Like any candidate, if you go back and you look at what they said versus what they did, most of the things that they promise probably don't get done. I don't have data on that, but I feel very safe in that assumption.
Yeah.
And so it's like, if a candidate can't even like lie to you about the idea of trying to make the world better, then they're for sure not going to do it. If all they can muster for you is just, this sucks, elect me, or it could get worse, like that's a very grim way to run. I think like we do need to get people excited about the idea of making the world better, which partially means acknowledging what things are going to make the world better. And those things are, healthcare and, securing the rights of people of color and trans people. And it's not these like big platitudinal things where it's like, oh, don't worry, like, she knows this Vine reference, so like we're gonna like it's gonna be great. Like,
yeah, she's gonna go live on Instagram.
Yeah, there's a reason people show up. Like everyone acts like Bernie is this secret spy or something, but no one will like look at the Occam's razor of it all. That maybe people are just stoked to have somebody be like, "Hey, it's fucked up that you have so much student debt,"
Right? Yeah.
Like that's the easiest answer for why so many people like these progressive politicians, but instead we have people like blathering on about how it's like QAnon, but it's for it gets insane sometimes. But yeah, I think we absolutely like moving forward, like, I vote Democrat. I don't consider myself a liberal because I don't like some of what that has like come to represent recently. I think it's a little too forgiving of billionaires, and it's a little too platitudinal in the way it treats like the rights of marginalized people. But I plan to vote Democrat no matter what. But I also plan to, if we end up with like a centrist Democrat running, I plan to like hound the shit out of them, on Twitter or whatever other ways possible, because like these people aren't going to do it on their own.
Right. Have you, like, especially in the past few years, like, have you noticed, like, I feel like this is something, I'm writing an article about this right now and having a hard time just, I guess, solidifying it, because there's so many moving pieces, and it feels like no matter what I say about the political spectrum, it's impossible to not piss off somebody, or someone's going to be like, this is totally off. But I think it seems like we're reaching a point, at least might be my own little echo chamber, our own little echo chamber, so maybe we're not going to get too much ground going here. But do you feel like we're at a point that people are starting to at least understand the split in ideology between people who come from a more leftist position and then versus like neoliberal or liberal or whatever you want to call it, left of center? Because I think like traditionally, like for the people I know in real life, like when we talk politics, there's still this overarching sense of just there's a left and there's a right, there's Republicans, there's Democrats, and I feel like, I mean, there's obviously been splits all over the spectrum, even on the Republican Party with like the Tea Party and the Libertarian movement and all that. But specifically with the left in policy and in just like the representation in politics right now, it does feel like for me personally, that we're kind of reaching this splintering point where it's becoming much more apparent like whose side of the left people are on, where there's like leftists that make up your kind of like socialists, communists, anarcho syndicalists, and even like moderately, I guess you'd say like democratic socialists, and then to the right of that you have the Democratic Party. At least that's how I see it. Like I'd be interested to know like where you how you perceive those differences and how you define them.
Oh, I mean, I would absolutely agree. I think there's a huge splinter happening within the left and the Democratic Party, because I think, a lot of people voting for Democrats are leftists who are just, understand that most of the time, all the time, we have to vote for a candidate who's not exactly who we need or want, but they're better than, the person who's trying to, institute a Muslim ban or anything like that. Like we vote because we have to. But I think this splinter is happening as centrist Democrats move more and more towards being like, if you look at Biden's, he hasn't even, I think he teased it, announcing that he's running today. But, he's a huge apologist for the billionaire class. And I think the billionaire class as villains is becoming harder and harder to deny. And I think the average person knows that much more than they used to, which is why I tend to be hopeful when it comes to everything. I know from all my talking, I may not sound like that, but I think like this recent push from politicians like AOC and like Ilhan Omar, like these are people that genuinely care and they can connect to the people that, are going to be voting in the future. And like, if I think I'm to the left, like the kids make me look like a fascist, like teens are woke as fuck now. So I am very optimistic about the next generation. And that's the thing about old people is they won't be here as long as we will. So I think if we stay the course, like, I mean, I know that sounds a little rough, but it's, I think a lot of people don't have as much sympathy for, baby boomers stuffing their bags full of silverware when the cops are busting up the party. I think that was a metaphor I saw somewhere on Twitter. I wish I knew the user so I could give proper credit, but I think I saw that on Twitter. It was just, that it's a party's getting busted and they're just trying to steal as much gold shit as they can.
Right. There is also, though, the part of me that thinks, and I've been actively bringing this up at parties to be the party pooper, because I feel like I'm at that phase where a lot of my friends growing up who would, I guess, have classified themselves as liberals in some sense of the word, or just left of center. And I'm trying to bring up actively this idea that, like, the older we get, it's just so much more natural to not even like necessarily drift more conservative, but like your positions just become conservative, I guess. Because like the older you get, like you get more responsibility. You're thinking about money more, and you get a family and a house or whatever it might be, your assets, and you're trying to like hold things together in a way, and like you're seeking out routine, and you want to reach some level of stability. Whereas when you're young and you're out there and you're open to everything, you're really just like trying new ideas out, and you're down to tear down the system and all that. So like it's interesting, like I'm only 27, so like from my perspective, I already feel the kind of pull, I guess you could say, to the right in some situations where like I see certain stuff happens and I feel like an old person reacting to it. Like even just like shit like TikTok. You know what I mean? Like I see TikTok come out, and then I'm like, like these dumbass kids and their new dumb technology, and like it's just an interesting thing to consider, and I feel like it should be talked about more. Like, do you think there's any bearing to that in like just because like you said, yeah, like the boomers are kind of going away, but at the same time, like the older we all get, aren't we kind of, unless we adapt, aren't a lot of the people our age who, like you said, like younger people than you, or they would consider you a fascist? Like, don't you think that we might become that thing?
Yeah, and I think like on some level what it is like when I was younger, I was much further to the left, I would say, than I am now. I would have, like, I would go on ranting about communism and shit like that. And like largely, I think like we do as we get older, there's kind of a sweet spot, at least I hope, that you hit where like youth and experience kind of hit the same level on a graph, and you have enough experience to feel confident in your beliefs, but enough youth to feel empathetic towards, those around you. Because I think when you get older, it's, the fragility of your body, the fragility of, just your mind, the way the pace at which the world changes. I think it does make people naturally more afraid. And I would love to say that I'll be the first person to be immune to that. And that, 40 years from now, I'll be just, as politically open-minded as I am today, but no one can guarantee that. I think all I can really hope for is just that, like, the guiding principle of wanting everyone to, like, have fulfilled their right to, like, a good and decent life will guide me in the right direction. And I think, like, when you meet a person who is old and racist or old and transphobic, what it usually is somebody who, when they were young, maybe probably had baby versions of those same views, but they were tucked into the margins of conversation, or they were, held mostly internally. And I think getting old just removes a filter in some regard.
Right.
And so I think it's, unfortunately it makes it hard to combat because you don't really know who's nursing these beliefs in one way or another. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it is something that you can catch in yourself. And there's always an opportunity, I think, when there's something new and terrifying to, to you as you don't understand it, to look at it and say, like, okay, I don't get this, but I can still read. I can still do the work of figuring it out. And even if at the end of reading it, like, reading about it, finding out about it, learning everything that I can about it, if at the end of it, I'm still like, this seems batshit crazy to me. Like, there's still the ultimate question of, but is it hurting anybody? And so I hope that having that principle that helps me become the, one of the not as annoying old people. But yeah, unfortunately, it does seem like age does something to all of us to make us think that people are trying to take things from us. And ultimately, maybe that's just a side effect of, like, life does take things from you as you get older. I can't imagine how my worldview would be different if, like, bending was hard or something like that.
Right.
Like, it's aging. Aging is body horror. Where we don't really change that much. From the time where in our early 20s to the time we're in our early 70s, it's just that our bodies get worse. And, you can see that when you see a group of adults. As a kid, you always think adults are having this high-minded discourse, and then you become one and you realize that they're just, like, as petty as high schoolers.
There's grown-up babies.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just like, oh, that's why old people get so weird, is because you're the same, but your body's failing. And that's terrifying. It's a terrifying concept.
I was going to say, it's also this weird thing because I don't know. I've been talking about this recently. I don't know how much validity there is to the idea, but it's just I've had this idea recently that in certain contexts, it's not like a catch-all, but in certain contexts, whether it's online or in person, people we tend to get more irrationally mad about a given issue when we don't personally have the like thought out arguments for ourselves for that issue. So like say I'll flip the script and make me a conservative in this situation. Like say I'm anti abortion. And then there's someone, and I come across someone, and they're like spouting off stats and information and personal stories, and they're being really compelling with their case that's against what I have, and I don't have the like thought through argument to make. I'm much more apt to just like resort to yelling or just getting mad because like I don't have the tool set, I think, to like deal with what's going on. Like I don't think it's a case for everybody because some people are just more prone to getting mad than other people, so like it doesn't work in every case. But I think about this in terms of what you just said, where I think the older you get too, you just have less time to spend in all these areas. Like whereas when you're young, it's just kind of like floating all around you. Like you're meeting new people, you're reading new things, and the world is much more intriguing, and you're much more energetic, I think, to take it all in, and then you get to like kind of spout all the information out there. And to older people, in some cases, they see that and they're like, "Oh man, that stupid, ignorant kid! Like, wait till real life hits them. Like, they don't know what they're talking about." But I think a lot of that attitude comes from the fact that like the older you get, you've already settled into your views. Like, you're not really spending as much time seeped into the actual information. Like you've resorted to whether it's like talk radio or cable news, like you're kind of like you get your information fed to you by whatever like kind of systemic like just routine, I guess, fits your already established beliefs. Whereas when you're younger, you're being hit with stuff from every direction, and it kind of just like feeds that thing. And I don't know, like I think that's at least partially true, I think, in a lot of cases, because a lot of older people, at least in my own personal experience, that whether it's on Facebook or even in real life, when these types of things get brought up, it almost immediately resorts to just like attacking and just like yelling and just like very aggressiveness. You know what I mean? Like it's very rarely like, oh, you think this? Like, why do you think this? Like, it's almost never an argument or a conversation. It's just like, oh, I can't believe you would think that, because they think they know. And I don't know. It's a thesis. I'm working on it, but I don't know. Like I feel like there's something there to that in some cases where it's like, if we're ignorant to something, but we really strongly believe it still, we're much more capable of being a dick about it, if that makes sense. Because like if you're confident,
totally.
You know what I mean? Like if you're confident in what you believe, like I'm speaking to you personally right now, like you said, you're very involved and immersed in politics. So like obviously for someone like you personally, you know your shit. So like your threshold, theoretically at least, would be a little higher to the point where you'd get mad because you can like explain things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think, on some level it, unfortunately, like politics gets mixed up with like preference. And I think that's, it's what you see with politicians happening a lot, where it's, people stan their politicians. They love their person. They love everything they do. And if they make a gaffe, it was, a rare exception to an otherwise untarnished record. But then if the other person makes a gaffe, then it was, their true nature being revealed and proof that they should be canceled once and for all.
Oh God. Yeah.
It's, we're much more likely to argue preference than we are to argue fact. Like, I'm not going to argue with a flat earther because I know they're dumb and wrong. But if someone says they don't like a band that I like, I would be much more likely to argue very passionately about that, even though in theory the argument with the flat earther is one that I could absolutely win with facts. I think we're drawn to these arguments of passion. And I think like in these arguments, it's very easy for like this pent up anxiety and anger we have at like the ultimate powerlessness we have within our system. It leaks out in one way or another. And, that's why you find yourself, you're just like, why did I just go absolutely nuts on a dude from high school on a comment thread?
Like my life later.
Yeah. My life didn't change at all. now if I ever see this dude again, it's going to be weird. His opinion's not changed. My opinion's not changed. So like, why did I do it? And ultimately the answer for me, at least typically, is just like, I was angry today.
Yeah.
It's like an emotional management thing. And I think a lot of that loops back into the whole mental health thing, where it's, I think we as a society have hit a point where when your life isn't consumed by physical agrarian labor, we all have a lot of free time with our thoughts, and that leads to a whole lot of like crises of the self. And I think that we need to be paying more attention to mental health, because I think like it's very possible that people are at each other's throats right now because we've just never had the free time to do it before, and now we do. No one was stopping working on a farm to talk about, like the positives and negatives of how they sold their corn. Like, if somebody came in and said, now your corn's worth half as much, then then they would kill that guy. And then the new guy would say, never mind, your corn's back to normal, until eventually he's like, now your corn's worth half as much. And then you kill that guy again. And, that was how things went for a while. But it's like now, society will remain relatively unchanged no matter how emotional we get about it, which is a remarkably odd state for people to be in.
Yeah. There's also this whole idea then too, where it's like, how much of this is technology versus human nature? Because to your point, I think there's a lot of cases where today, because of Facebook and Twitter or whatever, we're seeing all the people that we know and love's opinions all the time, and it's causing these visceral reactions, and we get in these arguments where in some cases we're like, why did we do that? But on the other hand, it's like, well, again, they've already obviously had that opinion, or they've maybe even had it their whole life, and up until recently, we just never had a platform or like the opportunity to talk about it. Because like for most, you know what I mean? Like for most of us, it's like the friends that we have, we're not spending every waking time we see them talking about some serious political issue. Like there's I spend a lot of time with like a small group of friends that I've known for years, and whenever we get together, we tend to actually get into like some of this stuff. It's kind of like they're my exception to this rule, I think. And like we like talking about it, but even with them, there's so many areas of opinion that I have no clue what they think about. So like there is that kind of weird push and pull where like, yeah, like some of it's obviously technology and like how everything's in front of us now. Like you had said that we're all in like the same room, and we're forced to embrace each other's opinions and fight through it. But at the same time, it's like, yeah, because that's not like, it's not like technology did that to us. Like so much of it is in part, at least, human nature and stuff that was already planted in our minds long before any of this ever came along. It's just now that we have this outlet, we're seeing it, we're getting more frustrated, and we're getting more viscerally involved with all of it. So I mean, like, I'm interested to know, like, from your perspective, like, you and I both, we're online all the time. Like we spend most of our jobs, like I know you're a writer and I do social media type stuff, and we're kind of in like similar spheres here. And obviously this is like, most of these political conversations are happening online. Like they're not happening in the town square anymore. And that kind of plays into just all the issues that we're talking about here, like the kind of lack of connection and face-to-face and like context with people's voices and all of that. Like there's so many, I guarantee there's so many things that you and I like had prior to us talking on like this phone call or the Skype call right now. We could have tweeted them back and forth at each other and probably gotten super pissed and like never talked to each other again, versus like if we were just like talking on the phone, it'd be like way easier to connect and understand where the other person was coming from. So I'm interested to know, like, for where you're at right now, like how important is it for you as someone who does spend so much time online and engaging with these topics to also do so in real life? Like, do you do this with friends that you know or with acquaintances in any capacity, or is this like a solely online field that you work in?
Well, I would say, like, politically speaking, I have made a concerted effort over the last like year or so to just stop fighting online. Like I don't see any good in it anymore. I've never walked away from it feeling like a mind was changed. And so a big part, it was for my own mental health at some point. I didn't need the fact that the world could, that some people held these views that to me are so wrong and so needlessly cruel. Like, I didn't need constant reminders that they not only exist, but are currently winning. As for like in person, I find it very comforting to talk about these things in person because, frankly, I love my echo chamber. I just hope mine's bigger than the other guys. It's I think it's good to talk about, especially like, when you can find nuances in opinion between yourself and your friends. Like, I think that's where minds get changed. It isn't in saying, it's very rare, I think, that somebody on one side of an argument talks to somebody on the exact other side and walks away completely changed to the other side. It's, I think what happens is you talk to your friends who maybe are on a different side of an issue of you, or like and just have different shades of the same color of opinion. And they, you explain to each other, like, this is why I like this is why I like that. And in my case, that's how I came to leftist politics as a whole was, I didn't really even understand for a while that there was like this whole other world. Like, I just, was angry with no direction to put it in. And it was talking to friends who were like, well, no, actually there's democratic socialism got introduced to me in that same way, where I thought like capitalism was something that, I wanted to like, I thought could be changed and made better. And then, a friend was just, outlined the parts of the system that are pretty much, toxic to their core to me. And like, slowly I was basically pulled over to, the democratic socialist side of things. And I think like, that's where speaking to friends and even like, acquaintances of friends, like I think speaking to people in spaces where everyone feels heard, and like, that's a big important part of it, is like making sure that everyone has a chance to talk. Everyone has a chance to like talk and feel safe to fully express what they're trying to say. But I think those spaces are the most important, because that's, I think, or at least I personally tend to like really learn things from others.
Well, it's interesting too, because I feel like on the left, there is a lot more. It's I don't know how to explain this. Like, this is the way it's described by critics is that the left, quote unquote, eats its own, because the left has that kind of self-critical element to it, where because it is the naturally, like, the progressive party, it's like the whole idea. It's like the idea of intersectionality. It's like what parts are we progressing first or the most, or like what do we focus on? You know what I mean? It's like everybody kind of has their area. Like whether it's someone who wants to focus on race politics or gender politics or like economic system or economic and social systems. Like you want to or like class or whatever. It's like everybody kind of has their area of expertise, and then that can kind of lead to colliding and clashing. At least it would seem so from the outside looking in the media, because the left it has that much more not even as self-critical, but it's just they're much more, I guess, vocally prepared to disavow people who are almost like heretics to the group. Like I feel like this is like an interesting time and place, because I feel like this has changed in recent years at some point from right to left, because the right, as it stands now, has been exceptionally good at organizing pretty much everybody from centrists, even a little bit center-left, to the very ends of authoritarianism and fascism at the other end. It's like, it's interesting how like people that would be considered like liberal or like center left, like I don't know, at least we're talking like traditional spectrum, not the totality of like leftism and all that, but like the way people traditionally have viewed Democrat, centrist, Republican. It's interesting how like a lot of centrist Democrats have been like aligned with the Republican Party in recent years, where like they've brought them in. It's kind of like this, we all have like a common goal. Whereas with leftism, because like we spoke earlier about how it's kind of splintering, there's been a lot more just clashing between ideologies, and certain people have like come out as like been like disavowed publicly, and then if they go online, they'll be like, oh, like the left disavowed me, and then like 6 months later they're on Fox News or something. You know what I mean? Like there's just this kind of like weird pattern there where like it becomes an opportunity for some people to grift, and then it can also be this weird situation where like there are people in the left who have firm views, but they also feel disenfranchised to a degree, because especially online, like you can drift into really, really dicey and divisive territory with certain users and and kind of like in-group, out-group people, because like everybody does have their really strong views on different sects of leftism. So like what's your experience been like over the years as kind of like a loosely defined member of leftism? Like, have you been, because you said through the account that you haven't really gotten any grief, but personally, have you seen this at all as like a whole, or like what's your personal experience been at least?
I mean, I've been remarkably pretty lucky. The few times I've had people say that something's wrongheaded to me, I mean, I've always been this way where if somebody, and yeah, I think part of it is my Midwestern nature to, if somebody's mad at me, I like to make it right as quickly as I can, like as long as it feels like it's in good faith. So there have been times where I've made like, wrongheaded jokes, or I've misunderstood a concept. Where people have, made no mistake to like tell me about it, and like, sometimes they're super chill about it, and sometimes people will kind of come in guns blazing. I find that I think it's a good tendency. I think it's rooted in good things to like want to have everyone kind of on the same page. I think ultimately, like, we're never all going to be on the same page, and I don't think it's necessarily wrong that people's priorities are different. I will say that I think infighting is one of the biggest problems the left deals with, just in that, like, there's a difference between getting into a disagreement with someone because they have different priorities than you, or because they, misunderstood an issue that you understand very well, and like getting into a bit of a heated argument. Like, that happens, and frankly, I think like that happens a lot between people who like intellectually respect each other. Yeah, and then there's a difference between doing that and then doing that, turning to Twitter and like screenshotting. I think screenshot culture is the fucking worst.
Oh my god!
And like screenshotting it, sending it to a group DM, and then just like crucifying this person like completely privately without any sort of context. And like, it's kind of like what I said before, where it's like we all like to think that our gaffes are like, just one step in our important learning journey to become the incredibly woke person that we're bound to be. And everyone else's gaffes are like their lizard mask falling off, and just being canceled. Like, haha. Yeah, exactly. It's like, and there's something that, and I think that's like our animal brains that just loves that, is like, we just want to tear somebody's fucking throat out sometimes, even if they're a friend. And like, I think that is bad. I don't love that happens, but also, I hope we live and we learn. It seems like kind of cancel culture and screenshot culture is having a bit of a moment right now where people are kind of second guessing the usefulness of a public mob. And to be clear, I'm not talking about any of the like powerful dudes who've been shamed out of public spheres.
Right. There's definitely a spectrum here.
Yeah, totally. Like all the Me Too cancelings, some of them haven't even stuck. Louis already back doing bullshit again.
Right.
But like, what I'm talking about more is, like somebody says something dumb, and then suddenly the whole internet's jumping down their throat, and their potential employers know about it. Like, people don't know that this all has the power to ruin somebody's entire life. Like even if it seems like it's over a very inane joke or something, if it gets big enough, it's like that's what shows up on Google for these people. And I've never, I've seen, like, I think John Oliver like just talked about it, where the example he used was the lady who was like suing her nephew, and it was all just like some big insurance bungle, but it was too late. Like, they'd written some article about how she was the worst aunt ever or whatever.
Yeah.
And it's just like how quickly these associations are made, where it's like, or if you look at just yesterday on Twitter, it was like the young Muslim woman who spoke out against Chelsea Clinton because she felt like the way she attacked Ilhan Omar was helping to spread Islamophobia. And so then suddenly everyone's like, Chelsea Clinton was under attack. And it was like, if you watch the video, it's just the student very like, she's passionate, but she's not screaming. She's not threatening her. Like, she's just saying what she thought. And like, both of the girls who were involved in that video got basically bullied off Twitter by people who were defending like this super wealthy lady. Like, and it's just like, people just see these dog piles start, and it's like, it happens on all sides of the internet. I guess I don't hang out on the right, but oddly enough, the right does seem weirdly harmonious. It doesn't really seem
that's what I'm saying. It's changed recently.
It's but yeah, I mean, I hope it's all in the name of progress. I luckily haven't seen anybody whose entire life has been ruined by it. But yeah, it's like I think it was Maple Cocaine who tweeted every day on Twitter. Every day there's a main character on Twitter, and the goal is not to be it.
That's a good one.
I mean, I hope I attributed that correctly, but I really feel that, where it's just like, yeah, I want to be, I want to, espouse the issues that I think are important without ever bungling so badly that I'm the one everyone's quote tweeting. But
right. Dude, I think it's so funny you brought up Maple Cocaine, because now I totally forgot about that user. But I think there was a period like in 2000, so like from probably like 2014 to 2015-ish, somewhere in there, I went through like a uber rational phase where I was just like obsessed with like the rationals and like that whole blogosphere and like the YouTube's, not, I shouldn't say the YouTube skeptic community as much, but like just that like your Sam Harris's and all that, and like I was like a big thing I was into. And I think it was Maple Cocaine tweeted something, or tweeted on someone else's tweet, and I tweeted some like dumb ass super logical type shit in response to like them just basically trolling. And
yeah,
oh my god, dude, I don't know who runs that account, I don't know anything about them, but they lit me up. And I just remember thinking like, this is the worst person ever, like how dare they, or whatever. Now like of course looking back I'm like, I was such an idiot to say that, but it is just so funny, like, because you don't know at any given moment. Like it's great that like you're able to be so introspective about it. And, like I think that more people are, as time goes on, becoming more introspective about all this, because you're right. Like I think you had said like you have that kind of temperament to just kind of like right the wrong or whatever, and like take a step back. But in a lot of cases, people just don't have that. Like people's knee-jerk reaction is the one they go with, and it's just like, well, I'm just gonna double down on whatever this thing is. And it's tough on the left in that way, just because like I don't see it, besides like some of these like super powerful like comedians and like celebrities, whatever, that become like kind of the face of call out and cancel culture. Like I haven't known anybody personally at like a smaller level that this has like really had a negative effect on, but I'm sure it's happening to some of them. And it's just like, it is weird because it kind of ties in. I was going to bring up at some point the podcast that you helped produce, or that you've created, the We Still Like You show.
Yeah.
Which when I read about that, I was like, this is such a great concept for a show, especially in today amidst like call out and cancel culture, because it runs directly in contrast to the idea that when someone does say something stupid or makes a mistake, and again, it's so dumb that I even have to disclaim this, but like obviously there's a spectrum of severity with this stuff, and some stuff is obviously deemed much more heinous than others, but like the concept of the show is really cool. So like I'll let you explain it, but yeah, like we can kind of like tie this in to contrast how we're talking about cancel culture and all that.
Totally. So basically, We Still Like You's whole deal is we invite performers, people who, it started with stand-ups, but it's extended to pretty much anybody who's willing to talk on a stage about slightly more personal things. And we invite them to basically tell a story of anything from their past that makes them feel shame. It's a comedy show, so we tend to suggest that it be something funny. But also we've had people tell like really intense personal stories, and they tend to crush. So basically what will happen is the person tells the story of something they're ashamed of, and then the audience, no matter what is said at the end, has to raise their glass, cheers, and say, "We still like you." The idea being to celebrate like shared shame, the fact that we all have misstepped at some point or another in our lives, whether or not we like admit it, everyone has, and to like understand it as part of a ongoing like journey to becoming a good person, like whatever your the ever elusive definition of what it is to be a good person. And basically, I mean, the whole thing centers around maybe just not being angry at people for being people, with the obvious caveat that, we would never book, people who you're never going to hear a rapist on We Still Like You. You're never going to hear a stalker on We Still Like You. Like we vet the stories to make sure, because like, we don't obviously think that every bad thing a person does, is some forgivable story, but it's people tell stories of times they've cheated in relationships, times they've stolen. We had a guy who stole a car and blew it up just because he was being a dumb teenager, and like, you know, stuff
Wow.
that yes, stuff that, you know, there have been stories that like definitely challenge the audience to like really think about like, you know, who this person is, what the story is. And there have been moments where I myself am watching and I just think, ooh, this is a tough one to like cheers to. But I think like we as producers do a really good job of vetting, because we have a wide swath of producers. At this point, the show happens in Chicago, Denver, out here in Los Angeles, and then in Louisville, Kentucky as well. And so we have such a wide swath of producers of all age, racial, gender, sexuality backgrounds that like I feel like we have a really solid net set up to see if anything like sets off any alarm bells for people, or, you know, if anything makes someone uncomfortable and they say, no, actually that's not something you should just forgive. Like the show is very conscious of like these ongoing conversations. Like now is not the time to be talking about like the nuance of, you know, what someone who commits like workplace, you know, sexual misconduct.
Right. There's like no
right
way to go about it. Because like even if it was like something 50 years ago for someone or something like that, like especially with how hot it is in the climate, like if that person is like a completely changed person and they've done all the whatever proper steps to kind of like come back into society, like it feels like there is that certain threshold where like what, like where is that like arbitrary line? Like how do you know, not just the audience, but like how the world is going to respond to this type of behavior or this type of action?
Yeah, no, I tend to echo the sentiments of a lot of great writers I've seen online, who've said, you know, that we can start talking about forgiveness when they start seeing any consequences at all. So it's, you know, at this current moment, that's just something that I don't really think the show needs. Like the vast majority of the stories are people who, you know, have been too drunk and, you know, made a mess, said something dumb, a lot of like childhood theft, a lot of like bad crushes, bad relationships. The more serious ones we've seen have been, there's been, you know, a lot of very fraught like stories of coming out and like the difficulty of getting to that process. And then there's been a lot of stories about, you know, people who maybe were raised in like less tolerant households and like adhered to these like really rough ideologies until they were an adult and figured out, you know, how to get past that. And I think like those are the stories that are the most important for the show, because I think ultimately like the way forward is understanding that not everyone is the sum of where they come from or the sum of like what they look like. Just kind of seeing people as in process and understanding that someone who has fucked up in some, you know, minor way in the past is more valuable than someone who hasn't but doesn't understand like the right and wrong of it all, like, or who hasn't been revealed to have fucked up in the past. Like, 'cause I truly believe that like everyone has done something they're ashamed of, and I just think that like the willingness to want to be better is such a key crucial part of it. And I think that our desire to find something that someone has done wrong and to see them punished for it is allowing a whole lot of like kind of sociopathic people to run around in our communities, and they know all the right things to say and all the right ways to present them. And then you hear a story from a friend about, oh, that guy's like pretty shitty to women or whatever, but you know, and like they know how to kind of move among you, and their record will always be spotless because they don't actually feel any shame. And I think shame is just kind of that first emotion you feel before you start understanding what you did wrong and how you can be better, and the way you react to it's incredibly important. And I think that, you know, a lot of people's shame is the root of like hatred. I think it's the root of, you know, a lot of anger. And I think the more we can teach people that shame is just kind of a, you know, emotional signifier of a process, that the healthier they can deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It almost feels like, like this is like one of the biggest, something you tagged on toward the end of that. Like, it sounds like that's one of the biggest criticisms of political correctness that I think is valid, just because it does this thing where it societally, it's like, okay, we say that you can't say these things, but then it's still like those people still believe those things. So it's like this whole problem then where it's like you have this like guys where like we're putting on like a nice face, and like obviously like I think the net. We can most people agree, at least if you word it the right way, like on the left and a lot of people on the right as well, that the idea of political correctness as not a derogatory term, but just as a concept it's been overarching a good thing because
Oh yeah.
you know what I mean? Like we've had more people that have learned to not say the things that hurt other people and all that, which is great. But to your point, at the same time, it does also enable a lot more people with these sociopathic tendencies who can now just play this game where like the blueprint is out there. Like anyone that's on Twitter or any of these social media platforms, it's like you know exactly what to say or what not to say. And like I'm sure you know people, like I've known people in real life who, if you met them, like they might seem like a really nice guy, whatever. Like they'll post all the right stuff, like the uber woke stuff on social media, and then I hear from like a friend of mine that they're creeping on them, or that they said or they did some really like suggestive, inappropriate behavior that is indicative of something much worse. And you hear about this stuff, and it's like it sucks because like that is like the crux of the problem. Like that's the whole. Like the chink in the armor, or whatever you want to call it, where like those types of people can slip through the cracks and then make the whole thing so shitty. You know what I mean?
The example I like to use when I'm talking to friends about, and I obviously won't use either of their names for reasons that will become evident. As when I was doing stand-up in Chicago, there are two comics that I think represent like a good opposite end of the spectrum. Where there was one guy who, you know, he had this tendency to always kind of say the politically incorrect thing. He didn't have like a great grasp on, you know, gender politics. He didn't have a great grasp on racial politics, and his comedy tended towards like the more edgy. And like he though like would always be the first guy at like an open mic that if a dude showed up who had like a, you know, bad record with women or something and needed to be kicked out, he would be the guy that would actually kick the guy out instead of openly like, you know, kind of puttering around the back and being like, well, I don't know what to do about him. Like he, in terms of actions, he got shit done, even though he was saying dumb shit all the time. And like, and when he said dumb shit, he didn't say fuck you. If you said that's dumb, he would let you explain it to him. And you might not always end up agreeing, but he would always like indulge your viewpoint, and he would hear you out. So he was like an imperfect guy that was by and large a helpful person. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there was a guy who was always the wokest poster in town. That guy, he was on top of every article about, you know, like how this lineup needs to be more this. And it's just like he posted every single right thing. And then we found out he was like a serial rapist on OkCupid.
Wow.
And, you know, doing one thing right or wrong doesn't preclude you from doing other things right or wrong in your personal life. And so we can't take anyone's you know, internet persona to be indicative of their whole life. It's, you know, bad people say the right things, good people say the wrong ones, and I think you just need to judge people by actions and patterns of behavior.
Yeah, and also I think there's something to be said about just in any case of what we've been talking about here, that there is something about, like when we're talking about these issues, you should always look at what the exception is and what the rule is, because I feel like to any of these principles, it's like, again, going back to the principle behind the idea of political correctness, it's like that's like an overwhelmingly positive thing where like most people it enacts net positive in most people's lives, but then you have these exceptions where people do manipulate and they do slip through the cracks, and you're right, like it gives opportunity for people to guise essentially their character, or like the monster, I guess you'd say, that's kind of like their other half in a way. But it is important that in all these cases that we do look at the full spectrum, understand like, yeah, like there's going to be in any group, in any party, in any system, there's going to be your people that suck and that are going to try to manipulate and weasel their way through. But then you have to also have a hopeful outlook toward like the beneficial side of it, like the vast majority of people that do.
And I think I certainly don't hope to say, like, just because, you know, I knew one guy who said dumb shit and did good things and another guy who was the opposite, that's the way the world works. But I think that, you know, we like to try and simplify things as much as we can. We like to be able to say, like, you know, that one good thing makes a good guy and one bad thing makes a bad guy. And the results are like far more complicated than that. And unfortunately, like, require a lot more vigilance as a person, especially if you're part of like an art community, like a stand-up or music scene. Like it sucks that good people have to do all the work to, stop bad people from doing bad things. But, they're never going to just hand you a dossier on all the bad shit they did. Like it's,
Right.
It's unfortunately like in order to understand if someone is acting in good faith or bad faith, if someone is a good or bad person, like you need to kind of get to know them a little bit.
And it sucks too because with the art community, especially like art meaning, like music, fine art, whatever, like just the arts in general and social media and everything. It's a community where whether it's you writing jokes on a the Not a Wolf Twitter account or someone doing stand up or someone who's in a band, it's an industry of people that thrives off vulnerability. Like it thrives off, you're putting yourself out there, you're creating words, you're creating songs, you're creating art to get people to open up, and it usually in most cases at least, it appeals to people who also are that way, like that are also open and want to experience these things. And it does suck because, like, the flip side of that coin, again, not in all cases, is just like there's a tendency for this to slip in, is that people that are drawn to those fields, like to be a great artist or an actor or just like someone who's like able to push themselves to put their own music out there. Like you have to have an ego. Like you have to have a certain level of confidence and in a lot of cases arrogance to be able to even think that people are going to give a shit about what you have to say or like what you are doing. And I don't know, I'm not a psychologist, I don't know what the stats are, but I would imagine that just in the arts in general, like if you look back like historically through fine painters and great composers, like there's some psychos, like there's some people that were just literally like not even, I shouldn't even say psychos, 'cause that's like derogatory, but like some were terrible people and some were just like mentally unwell. Like there's just a lot of crossover between like ego and like you're dabbling with, you're using your mental health issues in a way to like propel yourself into your art, and there's a lot of just that gray area in that entire industry, you know what I mean? So like I think that lends itself to it.
And I think that's ultimately the goal of the show, is to try and understand that like the reason people rarely speak to an audience because everything is fine and they're perfectly happy, like people who have reached self-actualization, people who are, completely content with their life as it is. Like, why in God's name would you ever want to stand in front of an audience full of people? And so it's, we all have, everyone has some part of them that they feel is damaged or broken. And, as like a person that struggled with mental health my entire life, like I feel that on like a very deep level. And I found that like this show was, when it started, a very good way of like processing that for me. And it, continues to be as my feelings towards it evolve. But I think that, it's just, it's hard. There's a whole reason that there's, this whole field of moral and ethical philosophy, because it's not a simple thing. And I think we too often want it to be, and we think that wanting it to be will make it simple. But it's never going to be. So I think we need to start, I guess, having more nuance in the way we understand that. But I mean, I don't know, also like, because you want to keep yourself safe and your friends safe, and you want to make sure that, that your community is an open one where everyone has a shot to, succeed equally. And so, in my opinion, like the people who stand in the way of that are easy folks to remove from a community. If there's some guy in a comedy scene saying, something derogatory about women, or that you hear is like following, girls around to their car, to me, that's a guy you remove. That's you can deal with mediation on your own time, but no one's paying anybody. Like somebody who's making somebody feel unsafe has got to go.
Right.
But then when it comes to speech, then it becomes a much more complicated thing, where it's, if the speech isn't hateful and it isn't threatening and it's just dumb, like what do you do with a dumb guy?
Yeah. Have you watched the show Crashing by any chance?
I have not.
It's one of these, I don't know if you've heard of it. It's a newer HBO show. It's been going on for the past couple of years, and it's Pete Holmes' show, the comedian.
Oh, yeah.
And this past season was the last one, at least. Until further notice, it got canceled from HBO. But there was the one episode in it. It was called, I remember it was called like Opener, Middle, Headliner or something like that. And it was basically like a weekend comedy show tour type thing where Pete went on it with this guy who was that kind of your edgy comedian who would say like the most offensive things just to get a rise out of people. And it was just interesting because it was like the dynamic between like Pete, who pretty much plays himself in the show. I mean, he's just kind of like your fun-loving, gentle, just like goofy type comedy, and then in contrast to this guy who's just like saying all the wrong stuff. And it was just but it's much more complex. Like to your point, like it wasn't the way the episode's shot. Like you're getting mad at this guy because you're like, wow, I can't believe he's saying these just awful things and just trying to get a rise out of people. And then as it goes on, you're kind of like empathizing with him almost. You're like, oh, like, wow, like this is like he hates himself. Like he's been trying to like make it in comedy for decades at this point, like hasn't gotten off the ground, and he's just like this bitter dude. And it is interesting because like this whole idea of the show that you do, it does like it plays in that nuanced middle ground where like you're introducing a character, like a human being that is flawed, and you're basically like offering them a road to redemption and seeing how people react to it. And it's a really, in the culture that we're in right now, I mean, it's really cool to have that. You know what I mean? So like, oh, go ahead.
We've definitely like I think entering, because I mean the show started in 2014.
I was just gonna ask, yeah.
We just had our 5-year anniversary, and I mean here's the thing: like at the very start of the show, it was pretty open and shut. You know, most of the stories since we were 22-year-olds were about people getting too drunk in college and like throwing up on something. But I found that as the producers and performers have gotten older, the things that stick with you shame-wise when you're in your like late 20s, early 30s and beyond are much different than the things that shame you in your early 20s. Because in your early 20s, like, you know, you're a little more shameless. Like it's a very selfish age, I think.
Yeah.
And so, like, as time went on, like, we've definitely had to change the way that we vet stories and make sure, like, you know, the message that we're trying to send is a clear one. And, like, what we're talking about is more so just, like, the little things that everyone does, that everyone fucks up, that stay with you, and understanding that, like, you know, just trying to, like, kind of give people a window into each other's brains a little bit more, because ultimately, like, isn't what everyone's looking for from art to, like, feel a little bit more seen, like, a little bit more understood. And I think that our show helps with that. And I think it's, you know, there have been moments where people have come up to me after the show and they've said that, you know, they feel like incredible after having told the story because they never had told anyone about it before because they carried it for so long.
Wow.
And there have been some people who said that it just felt weird and they're not sure like how they feel about it, because like again, like shame is like this incredibly complicated emotion, and it's like tied, it's such a physical feeling. Like it's not, you know, like it's tough to describe, but you know, when you say like shame, everyone kind of understands like, you know, what theirs is. Like one of the first things I hear from people when I talk about the show is, oh, I know what story I would tell for that, or I know what thing I'd do for that. I think like it's kind of telling in that regard, because like, you know, people immediately can just like pull out of their brain without any coaching really at all, and they can just be like, yeah, that is the thing I'm most ashamed of. Now getting them to say it on a stage in front of strangers is a whole different thing.
Well, it's interesting too, because it's like what might be cathartic for someone would be absolutely the worst thing ever for someone else. Like for someone, it might be the most, you know, relieving thing ever to get in front of people and to tell their story, and for someone else, it might just feel like reliving trauma or just like opening up a wound that they maybe weren't ready to talk about. So there is that spectrum, you know. Trauma
has surrounded a lot of the stories that I think have been more difficult for people to tell, because reliving trauma obviously can be really difficult. Like speaking from my own experience, like of my own stories that I've told on stage, when I started, they were all pretty run of the mill. Like one was a friend set me up on a blind date the evening after my grandmother's funeral, and like that, it was just like kind of like a weird, like it doesn't feel like it should be happening today type thing.
Yeah.
And then one I told years later was about the one time I've been in a fight in college, and how like it completely disrupted this image I had of myself of like a guy who's like above it all when it comes to masculinity, and replaced it with an image of a guy who doesn't want to fight because he's not that good at fighting. And so, it's that type of thing, I think, for a lot of people, is just like the unexpected sources of shame. And yeah, I think it's very complex for each individual storyteller. Like, each story is very much tailored to the person telling it, and we do our best as producers to not mess with that at all. Like, we really want to let them tell the story like the way they remember it, like because the show started as a house show, and the way we always wanted it to feel was like you were telling a story to your friends. We wanted people to feel like it was like a safe room to admit these things,
right?
But we have had to think about it more as we've gotten older, just because it's not all throwing up in public anymore, and so it's been a matter of trying to figure out what the right balance is, because we don't want to sacrifice what makes the show great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Oh no, that's all I had to say.
I was going to say, yeah, it is tricky because like you're balancing the idea of a safe space, but with the also the idea that you want to be able to be inclusive and invite people in, and doing that with these topics, you're inevitably gonna be kind of like breaching on certain territories where like certain things might get dicey or a little offensive or a little hard to talk about or hard to hear, and you kind of have to. I can imagine that's a difficult thing to constantly be going back and forth balancing. Like so you've been doing this for a few years. Like, what's been at least at this point, like what's the general response like? Is it a growing thing, or is it something that you're kind of like tailored into a specific audience?
It's definitely a growing thing. It has a very large community surrounding it in Chicago, because that's where it originally started. It's currently at the Flatiron Theater out there on the first Saturday of the month. And that theater seats like 60 people or so, and it's sold out every month for like the last couple of years. So yeah, it's definitely like it has its own community. There's a podcast of it, so if you can believe it, of the people that we convinced to tell the stories on stage, there's the majority of them also let us put the stories out
forever
on the internet. yeah, and so I mean, I think what we've done to set it, because there's a million storytelling shows out there, there's a million comedy shows out there, but I think what we've done to really set ourselves apart is create an environment of very genuine empathy. Like, I think it's tough to place directly into words what exactly We Still Like You is, but there's like a very specific energy in the room where I think people do feel safe there, both as audience members and as storytellers. And I think given the subject matter that we deal with, that's something that's really difficult to pull off, and I'm very proud of us for having managed to do it as long as we have, and I hope that we keep doing it.
Yeah, it's so cool, man. So like, I mean, we've been going on a while here. I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but between like these projects, like between We Still Like You and then Not a Wolf, which is wrapped up in this book that you're working on now, and obviously you do comedy and other writing, like, is there a specific avenue or a specific field that most consumes you as part of your like personal identity, or are you just kind of the type of person you're all over the place and you're constantly trying to reach into all these different pots?
Yeah, I would say I try not to stick to any one format too much. I mean, if anyone wants to see, the majority of my like day-to-day work is just stuff on Twitter, and then I have like a newsletter I write, and I'll write longer pieces as they come to me, but then I also have a day job and rent to pay, and I'm working on a book right now. So the majority of my time right now has been invested in writing the book, not getting fired from my job, and continuing to just kind of be online, because it's unfortunately a big part of both. I dream of a day when I get to just write what I want and not have to live on the Hell website, but I do unfortunately have to be on Twitter, man, all the time.
Yeah, you would be the same.
But I mean, if I were to pick like a dream medium to get to work in, I really do love writing books. This is my first one, but I really enjoyed the process, and I have some exciting plans for what would come next in the event that anyone lets me write again. I hope they do.
Awesome, man. Yeah, like, so I'll throw in links and all that. Was there any specific place you want to send people, or any final things you want to tag on here?
I mean, my Twitter is kind of the main hub of everything. It's just @it's DanSheehan. And then if anyone's looking for like contact info and stuff, my website's just DanSheehan.fyi. It's DanSheehan.com is taken by a very prominent UFO scientist. So
of course.
So yeah, I mean, even if you get the URL wrong, it'll be an interesting website. So
it's a win-win. Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks so much again for all the time and the insights. This was a really lot of interesting stuff here, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Glad to talk.
All right, man. Have a good one.
You too.